You don't know Karen from the Meaning Code. Don't know me either. John VanderKlay is happy. My name's Paul VanderKlay. I am a pastor from Sacramento, California. I started in 2017 making commentary videos on Jordan Peterson's biblical series, and a bunch of people, because I made those videos, wanted to talk to me. And as I talked, we began sharing some of those conversations, and that begat a Discord server, and that begat Estuary, and those begat conferences, and that's how we got here. So, how about you, Karen?
My name is Karen Wong, and I got interested in Jordan Peterson about the same time Paul did. But then I was looking for a Jordan Peterson meetup, and the only one I could find in California was in Sacramento. And I live in the Bay Area, about a 2.5, 3-hour drive from there. So I drove up there to meet Paul and to go to his meetup. And then after that, I kind of got interested in his YouTube channel. And then he and I had a talk, and then he said, why don't you start a YouTube channel? Anybody can start a YouTube channel. So I did. So the Meaning Code is the intersection of science and philosophy and art. And faith comes in there, sort of in the background, because some of the scientists I talk to are pretty antipathetic towards faith, let's put it that way. So.
And what are we supposed to do up here? You have a place to start, otherwise I can start too. Okay,
oh, no,
let's go with your place to start.
Yeah. Well, no, you're going to start.
Well, I'm
going to, you know how Peugeot always says that the feminine archetype is the one who frames things through the question. So I'm the feminine archetype, he's the masculine archetype. So I'm gonna frame the question, and then he can pick which question he wants. And I sort of see this as, this morning we had the mega estuary with all of you involved. Right now you're going to have the mini estuary, just the two of us talking. And I have some topics to pitch to you, and I won't go into detail. I'm just going to throw out some words, okay? One of them would be mercy. One of them would be the demonic. One of them would be death, or the crown, or love, or was there one more? I think that might be it.
I will definitely start with love.
Okay.
Because I was thinking, while we were listening to this latest stage thing, and actually VanderKlay leaned over next to me and said, it's kind of strange that we're having this high-level theological conversation here. Why is that? And I thought, but it's not out of place. Why is that? And I was thinking about Esther's presentation, which was, Esther is obviously very practiced at her presentation. She's given that, where's Esther? There she is. She's given versions of that presentation hundreds of times, and she had this tiny little window, so she couldn't do with us what she really wanted to do with us, which is all kinds of games and all kinds of tricks, because she wanted to do those games and tricks to demonstrate. Instead, she told us. And then I went all the way back to the Job conversation, and I really loved that conversation, even though I've heard Jess talk about Job a lot, and Yosef I greatly admire, but haven't heard enough from him, and Sherry, of course, I love, and it was such a wonderful mixture. But the thing that stuck out at me was Sherry said, God, is revealed in nature, which brings me back to theology, prolegomena, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. Day after day they pour forth speech. But I thought, Job had all of that. Job looked up at the sky. When Behemoth and Leviathan were named, Job knew them both, but God had to speak and God had to point. And then Job knew. And so we were talking just a minute ago about, we've got this high-level theological conversation, and as a pastor, I know what talking theology in front of a bunch of mostly normies does to people right after lunch. But we talked about the fact that that was really important, because what will happen when we get into our estuary meetings is that 4 of the people will be like, they don't want to say anything bad because they're polite, but one person will say, wow, that Jordan Daniel Wood, J.D. Lyon, that was amazing. And the other people will be like, and then they'll say why. And they'll do, in a sense, what God did to Job, even though they sat and saw the whole thing, but they didn't know. And that one person in the estuary group, that might even win the points, because that one person will take what these 2 very learned academic theologians said, and that touched my heart, and I loved it, and here's why. And that little estuary group, like in an estuary, in a little tidal pool with those crustaceans and all those little animalitos, they are going to chew on that little nugget, and that's going to create a little group. And I loved what you guys said about love. Vendonk was working on the preamble to estuary because he works on these things. And he said, we got to get the word love in here. And we do. Because the reason, it is an amazing thing that any of you came to this at all. Because we've got all these different levels on stage, and then you're going to sit in these little groups of randos that you don't know, and you might start out a little bit afraid about who's going to be in my group and what am I going to say. But just 48 hours later, there's going to be people that you didn't know before, and you came here, and you will say without batting an eye, with a little bit of courage, wow, I loved that. In fact, I even love some of them. And so to take some of what Esther said, as a kid, we read I'm old, so read the old versions of the Bible, and we read things like, Adam knew his wife. And of course, that's love. And so, love. Even though I was really glad Tyler said what he said about the demonic, because one of these days I'm going to make a video about that point, because I'm really worried about the use of that word right now in our culture.
Well, maybe we'll get there while we're talking about love.
Okay.
Because I'm very worried about what it's doing in our culture, too. Yeah. The speak, point, see thing made me think about what Parker said to me when I first met him at the barbecue on Thursday. Parker only found out about this bunch of people, Paul included, a month ago. So I was kind of exploring that. Well, how on earth could a month give you enough information to want to come to this thing? And we were just talking about the whole general approach of the corner, and how Paul puts out so much content that one person can't even keep up with Paul, much less keeping up with all the peripheral channels. And Parker said, but in a sense, you don't have to, because here we have a repository in this place right here with the 80 or whatever people of all the knowledge of all the channels that we've been listening to over the last 5 or 6 years. Because each one of you is populated with some of that, and then we come together and we love each other and we get to know each other, and all of that wisdom percolates together in these relationships.
I like that picture.
Parker's really, it's a good thing he's here. I kind of feel like God tapped him on the shoulder and said, get on over there.
And I got a guy who's even known less of us. JP, where are you? There he is. When did you hear about us?
I first heard it from Rod Dreher on Substack, and then I heard from the podcast, and then you were on the podcast.
And here he is. He didn't know about any of this thing, and he dared to come. And
Do we need to start giving prizes for?
I do want to give prizes. I do want to
I'm
have.
glad he did come
Thank you, John.
for my dinner.
Oh,
And his beer.
And my beer.
and his beer. So, indeed.
This guy
And
right here had never heard of any of this before he just showed up. He's my friend. I just said, come on.
and this is something that John Van Donk keeps. You know, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for John and I to talk today, because part of why we do estuary at this level, at the conference level, is for these people who come here without knowing anything of this. And I was really quite amazed by what Rod Dreher had to say after being at Midwestuary. But I completely understand why, because most conferences are you all sitting there passively and us sitting here yakking at you, and something might break. So I'm a preacher, so I'm used to this. But I know that the really important things are happening on that porch and in that room. That's where the really important things are happening. But I can't, it's really hard for people to know that without being on that porch or being on that room, because I can't describe it. The knock keeps trying, but I don't know that it can be done.
Well, one of the things that happened for me in the early days of my channel is that Luke Thompson introduced me to the ideas of Esther Meek. And at that time, I didn't have access to Esther, and I only had, I didn't have the money to buy the book, so I just, got online and I read some summaries. And I came away with a very simplified version, which forgive me, Esther, it's probably wrong, but I had been studying Jordan Peterson a lot, and he talks about how at every moment you're confronted with a field of infinite possibility, and how do you know how to get across that field, because you don't know where the path is to get you from one place to another. But if you are looking at the highest thing of which you can conceive, these truths come into your vision that give you a path forward. And there's a little glimmer out in the future, little glimmer out in the distance that's saying, come, come, which he said, I think Jung calls, that's your future calling you forward. So when I started reading stuff from Esther, I'm thinking, it's really like that unknown out there is where all the treasures are hidden, and it's God calling us into the unknown with an offering of love. And that's really the only, and so if we make a relationship with that love, Peterson always says, make friends with the unknown rather than the known. That voluntary relationship with that love, then we can move forward into the future unafraid, knowing that if we speak the truth, whatever happens, even if it doesn't look good to us at the moment, we can know that we are moving on love's path. So what do you think of that, Paul?
I think that's right. When you two first started, it looked like a classical exam. It's like, which is, I concur. I'm gonna bring in the crown now,
Okay.
because I really loved what Jordan Daniel Wood said about the self and sin. I think he's exactly right. One of the stressors that estuary stresses non-Christians, because sometimes our little things here can get very Christianish and Christian-y, and in our culture, for some very good historical reasons, that makes some people nervous if they've left the church or walked away from the church or are afraid of the church or for whatever reason. This stresses Christians when they come here, because Christians, of course, have a certain path and certain procedures that they follow, and words get said in this room that are words that aren't allowed to be said in churches and things. So, but let's talk about crown, because what happens out there in those little estuary groups is, in fact, addressing what Daniel talked about, as Jordan Daniel Wood talked about. What do I call you?
Just call me Jordan.
Jordan. what Jordan talked about as sin, because what do you do when you go into that little group and you pitch and you point? Because that's all about you. And it's also all about your lack. And you seem to have some strange idea that those other randos in that circle have something that you need. You don't know what it is, but you have a clue that they might, and you really are seeking your crown. You really are seeking your completion, because of course a crown is just is the sun setting and shining forth from our crowns. And so what's happening in those little groups is we are dealing with our fractured persons, and we suspect that these other fractured persons have pieces to share with us. And in these little groups, sometimes like Sienna, where's Sienna? There she is. You know, Sienna in our group pitched 2 kinds of easy. And I thought, that's going to live with me a long time. And we chewed on that. Didn't win all the points, but we chewed on that. And I have a sense that what happens in those little groups, combined with all this crazy stuff in this room, especially this conference, brings us together and re-knits us as people, and we really long for those crowns.
Well, I always think in art terms, and for some reason when Paul started talking about the crown, it made me think about, I keep going back to Dorothy Sayers' Trinitarian image of what happens when you are creating a piece of art, whether it's music or poetry or writing or painting. And that really mapped onto my own experience of creating art. It's the idea. You start with an idea, and then in order to bring the idea into realization, you have to hunt around and find the resources that you're going to use, your own physical resources, your own skill or lack of skill is going to have an impact on it. The kinds of resources you choose, the way that you limit and constrain what you're going to use is very important, because are you going to use oil paint or water paint? Are you going to use a twig or a brush? The possibilities are endless, but you have to limit that, and then you take those resources and you begin one step at a time, one stroke at a time. Every stroke you put on the painting, this thing is puffing. Are you hearing the puffing? Okay. Is it better if I hold it out here?
No.
Puff away. Puff away.
How about if I hold it here?
No.
One puff at a time.
You have the idea. In order to bring that idea into reality, you put down a stroke and you look at it. Is that moving me towards the goal or away from the goal? And that only goal that you have is this idea that's up here. So you keep reiterating and you keep putting down more strokes, more colors, more lines, and then you look. And as you're looking at it, the context changes every time you put on a new stroke. In a way, that's the same way. I've always had this idea of experiential DNA, that my experiential DNA is completely unique, just like my physical DNA is unique. And each of you have a unique experiential DNA that's not only composed of all the things you've ever done, but it's all the people you've ever met, and every word your parent ever said to you, and every song you've sung, and every time you sang a song the second or third or fourth time, and how it was new and vital at that moment. You could go on for hours just exploring what the experiential DNA of any one individual is. So everything you say and everything you think and everything you speak out and everything you hear is going through that filter. It's like a filter inside of me. That's built one step at a time, and every single step that built that DNA creates a new context. So that's why I'm me all the way through my life, but the me that I am is always growing in complexity and beauty. like every one of God's artworks. So to bring this back into the painting, with Dorothy Sayers' framework, you have the idea, and then you have the energy, which is this process of using the resources to create the work. And you have a completed work, which now has power in the world. So you have the idea, then you have the energy, and then you have the power. She relates that to the Father and the Son manifesting in the world, and then the power of the Son manifest in the world is the Holy Spirit working through all the believers in the body to glorify Christ, which of course is the crown. I'll stop there.
Now we'll get to the demonic.
Here's a transition.
Okay, now let's get after it, Paul.
Well, what Tyler said is exactly right, because the word is easy to say. And I want to get to Sienna's two kinds of easy.
Hey, wow.
Because Sienna said there's two kinds of easy, and this was kind of in the context of AI. And so one kind of easy is the high school kid that's supposed to write a paper about Les Miserables and goes to ChatGPT and is a little bit smarter than most of his classmates, says, write an 11th grade paper for Les Miserables that's such and such words long, and it spits it out, copy, paste, hand it in. That kind of easy is a path to hell. It's a path to fragmentation. And that's one kind of easy. And then the other kind of easy is you're doing something, and you tried, Sienna was talking about that she's planning her wedding. This is, at least from what she said, sort of the second big ramp up to planning her wedding. And this time, things are falling into place. And so you kind of have the sense of, maybe it's meant to be. We have all sorts of words for this. Maybe God is blessing me. Maybe my prayers have been heard, and it's all coming into place. And then Karen used the comment about, and I can use this with your painting, I mean, what you do with your painting, how long has it taken you to become the artist you are now?
Well, I mean, the real answer is my whole life, because all your experiences are important as well. But I didn't start painting until 1997. And I didn't start in earnest until 2004. And my teacher at that time said it's all about brush mileage.
And you told that story at a previous about the two groups in the POTS class. You want to tell that story?
Sure. Imagine you're a pottery class, and it's the first day of class. And I talk to the pottery class, and I say, okay, it's possible to get an A in this class. Everybody's really excited, okay? Half of you, this half over here, your responsibility is to make the most beautiful pot that you can make. And if you make a really beautiful pot, you're going to get an A. This side over here, your responsibility is to make as many pounds of pots as you can. Doesn't have to be beautiful, just make a lot of pounds of pots. Okay, what happens to this group over here? Anybody have an idea? Any of you guys have an idea if you're trying to make a beautiful pot, what's going to happen?
Pressure.
And what does that do? Come on, speak out.
They don't get enough rest. They're paralyzed.
It constrains you.
You won't do anything, will you? You'll just think and think, how can I make a beautiful pot? What's going to make it beautiful? You get immobilized with the fear, right, of having to produce something perfect. This group over here is just going to throw pots day after day after day after day. And eventually, wow, throwing pots, you start to learn something about throwing pots. The last conference I was at, some lady told me that she used to have this question she asked at every party. She'd say to people, what's the thing that you've learned so thoroughly that you found out there's no bottom? The first guy said to her, milk. She said, what are you talking about? And he said, I'm a dairy farmer. And the more I learn about the milk, the more I have to learn about the milk. And eventually I learned so much about milk that I find I could spend the rest of my life studying milk and I'd never come to an end of it. The next guy said, paint. She said, are you an artist? He said, no, I'm a house painter. But when you start thinking about the chemical composition and how it goes on and which kind of tools you use and how many covers are needed, every color requires a different, like you try to put yellow on a wall, you better put white on there first because you're not going to get yellow, right? Because some colors are transparent, some are opaque. Well, with me, that's what happened when I got into the art design thing. I learned so much that all of a sudden the bottom fell out and there was the universe. So
that's the other kind of easy. If you can do things easily that I can't do because you worked a whole lot of not easy for a very long time so that now things look easy. And my wife always says this thing, something done well looks easy. And usually when we see someone doing something well, it's because they have worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And so then, well, this was easy. And to the demonic, so if you think about those two kinds of easy and you read C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters, the demonic is all about making your life easy. That's what it is. Because the Uncle Demon says to the other, make sure that they don't have any problems. Make sure that everything comes easily. Make sure that one day after another, it's all smooth. And I would guess that most of you have not had smooth lives. And one of the things that you deal with, and we could talk about death, unless you want to talk about the demonic some.
well, I was going to bring love back into with the demonic just for a moment.
Go ahead.
If the hallmark of the demonic is Mr. Sarsma, is that right? There. What is your name again?
Dan.
Dan.
Jasmine.
Dan. Okay. Okay.
Frisian.
So Dan was saying that the demonic is all about taking territory, expanding the territory, right? But you're adding into that the demonic is all about making things easy. When we talk love in the church, we often think of it in this very kind of amorphous way. Like somebody coming in might think, oh, love, squishy, warm, let's all be nice and the John Lennon love kind of thing. But, the old thing in the 80s was love needs to be tough. And what does that exactly mean? And because love wasn't tough and love wasn't providing opportunities for opponent processing so that we could be strengthened and not fragile, love ended up in a weaponized compassion that is leaving our children defenseless in the world. And so I wonder what you think about that.
So to explain how I got here, people, because I talked about Jordan Peterson, they wanted to talk to me, and because I didn't know them and because I'm a pastor, I always started with their life. And I usually start with a little simple question, tell me about the home you grew up in. And from that little question, a thread develops. And I noticed very quickly, many of the people contacting me, not all, but many of the people contacting me grew up in places of pain and places of loss. And in many of the conversations I had, the two people that brought them into the world and gave them life, who at one point in their life stood on a stage somewhere and declared to the whole world that they would love this person to the day they died, at a certain number of years later decided they absolutely could not stand to share a home with that person anymore. And so I don't know anybody. Well, I grew up in a really wonderful home, and there are some people here that did too, but a whole lot more people in this room grew up with a lot of pain. And a lot of that pain did a lot of fracturing of their persons. And the reason that they watch videos or come to an event like this and sit in that little group and are a little bit mousy at first maybe is because, again, they think that pain can be healed. And where am I going with this? Do you know?
We were talking about the demonic and love and weaponized compassion and leaving our children defenseless in the world.
There's a lot of... I've also noticed that it's a very strange paradox that people who, because of how they were raised, have difficulty with trusting, it doesn't often mean that they can't trust anyone. They more often than not have developed a pattern of trusting the wrong people. I see that again and again. Where am I going with this?
Well,
We trust you.
I trust Karen.
if you're trusting the wrong people, that often is a symptom of falling into the wrong kind of easy. Right? Yeah. Does that take you anywhere?
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good.
It's like jazz talking about
And our children are defenseless, and I think it's not only that the kids look for the wrong kind of easy. To get back to where you were going with this, the parents have given them the wrong kind of easy.
Amen, amen, amen. I was one of them. Mea culpa.
And every parent, even the good parents, what do they want for their children? They want golden lives for their children. They don't want their children to suffer. They don't want their children to suffer. They want their children to have everything they need. They want their children to succeed in school. They want their children to pick the right marriage partner. And they want their children to flourish. And there's a degree to which all of that parental parenting can make the wrong kind of easy for children. And in God's strange mercy, I think in a Job-like way, God gives us a world that on sometimes does give us that wrong kind of easy, but through life really gives us the good kind of easy, which is painful and hard. And what I've known from hearing many of your stories, I think about Sherry telling me her story, and her as that teenage girl, God pushing her down in the dirt, face down. What a story. And Grim Grizz, double latchkey kid, and his story. And I see coming together here as a lot of us have had the wrong kind of easy, and we're looking for that other kind.
Well, you're making me think about my husband, who I miss because I'm here and he's there. But I tell people my husband was Jordan Peterson before Jordan Peterson was Jordan Peterson. In terms of being the responsible person and doing, growing himself as an individual and doing everything he can to be a good father and helping in the community. And if we're driving down the road and there's a branch out in the middle of the road, he'll get out of the car from the side, he'll make his way into the middle, he'll hold the traffic back, he'll get the branch, he'll pull it out of the way. If we run into a stalled car, he'll stop and help the people push the car. He's that kind of a guy, okay? Now, here's what I don't understand. He grew up in desperate poverty, living in a tin shack where they were squatting on the top of a high-rise in Hong Kong, where his father was never home because he would go out and make a little bit of money every day and then go spend it on himself. And his mother is trying to raise 6 kids in this one room. And when my husband was born, his brother was 4 years old, and his mother gave the brother a bottle with a nipple in it and said, give him this every 3 or 4 hours. And she went off to work because if she didn't come home with enough money to put rice on the table that night, they would all starve to death. That's where he grew up. And his brothers were abusive to him as he was growing up. And his mother originally named him One Penny because she had tried to first abort him, and then she had tried to donate him to another family because she knew she didn't have the means to take care of him. He grew up without resentment. He says, can you imagine the life that she had to live, and she still gave me life and still gave me food and brought me up? He grew up without Christ, without any sort of faith family, without any sort of community, and still, he grew up with a desire to be, even before he became a Christian, he had a desire to be a faithful member of the community and get a good job, get a great education, all of those things. How does that happen? And as I've thought about it, I think it has something to do with the culture, because the Chinese culture is all about, you better make something of yourself. You know, I don't care what you feel. Life is hard, and you better make something of yourself. We don't have that in the American culture at all. You can be whatever you dream, you know. Follow your dream, follow your heart. Well, okay, there's a paradox there. There's got to be someplace in between, because obviously he grew up without some resources. He didn't know what it meant to be a good father, and so we had a lot of sorting out to do in the early years of parenting. He'd never had a model. He tried to meet men in the church who could model that for him, because he became a Christian when he was 26. We met when he was 33. We met when he was 31, and we got married when he was 33, and I was 44. So anyway, how does that happen, Paul? Because love's got something to do with it.
Well, I'm a Calvinist.
What do you mean by that in this context?
I mean, God knew your husband and had a plan for him, the likes of which no Hollywood writer would dare to write, and worked through that horrible, painful, terrible situation through a series of events that none of us would dare imagine possible to bring him all the way to the place he is today. And God will not abandon him, but will see him through to his completion. That's what I mean by that. That God is good enough that we can't dig a hole so deep that God can't get us out of. And that's a mystery. I was at so why this estuary thing? You know, I've told the story a few times here. Maybe I just got it. This is one of these stories I'll have to keep telling. We had these Jordan Peterson meetups. We knew they were bottoming out. Donk and I, Jordan Peterson had disappeared. COVID stopped our Jordan Peterson meetup trick. Donk and I, you know, we're going to do something. And Donk, well, here's these things we can do with groups. All right. So then the Germans are going to have a festival. Remember that first night at the festival? Gosh, it looked like a refugee camp. And then we had this festival in Germany, sort of around estuary, and then Donk and I were just going to go to places that people pointed us to in Europe, and we'd go into a room with 10 or 15 people, and all we had was this estuary protocol, and what's going to happen? And it worked every time. What do I mean it worked? I mean, people started not knowing hardly anybody, and over the course of 2 hours, they shared their pain, they shared their stories, they got a little piece of what they needed from each other, and they left the room saying, oh, well, that was really worth it. And it's strange how these things happen, because I look at John VanDonk's life, and you can find his randos on my channel. He did not grow up in an easy situation. Canada messed up his visa, so he stayed, and he just wanted to survive, and so he saw that, of course, Christian Reformed farmers were making more money than everybody else because they were Dutch, and so he becomes a Christian, and his life goes the way it goes. God has a way of doing really strange things, and in one of those estuary groups in the UK, people asked about miracles, and they said, do you believe miracles exist? I say, yeah, that's easy. Miracles are easy. They're all over the place. You'll find stories of them everywhere, and people that just dismiss them out of hand have not been around enough. Because if you get around this world long enough, you find lots of miracles, and your husband is one of them. The really painful mystery is the woman sitting next to the guy who got the miracle and she didn't get one. And that is the painful mystery of Calvinism, because I can look at your husband's story and say, God has had his hand on him. But what about that other person and their pain? I don't know.
Well, now you hit one of my pet peeves. You know how people will say, oh, God blessed me today, or I got this great blessing today. And I mean, over the years, I've come to the conclusion that everybody gets blessed all the time, every day. God is just always blessing. And why would we think that some particular thing that happened is a blessing and not the other things? So the one who got the miracle was blessed, and the one who didn't get the miracle was blessed. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Is this being filmed? Okay. So about 15 years ago, something happened to a person, and I'm not going to talk anymore about that, but I prayed, please overcome this, let this be healed, fix this. I prayed, I was on my knees, I cried, I prayed. Nothing. But would I want to trade who I am and who the people in my family are today over who we were back then? Because if I'd gotten a quick fix back then, I would be a completely different human being in a completely different part of the universe. But because that prayer wasn't answered, I had to see, well, it's probably me. It's probably us. Maybe we need to be growing and changing and transforming and allowing that suffering to hollow us out so we can be filled up more and more with God. So everything is a blessing. We're just not looking at it the right way. And one last thing on love. The reason I brought that up as a topic is this morning I got to thinking about that verse, we love because he first loved us. And there were a lot of times I looked at that verse and I'd think, that makes me feel not very wanted. It's not a very, warm, comforting thought to think, I don't know why. I mean, that's the way my mind thinks. It's kind of crazy. But I thought, what if I could have loved God without him loving me first? My first thought would have been, wow, I'm capable of love. I'm special. Aren't I a loving person? And so there are reasons for every single word in the scripture to help us realize that we are so susceptible to falling over into the wiles of the enemy.
As if it's a secret.
And then the other thing about the demonic is the reason I wanted to talk about that is because I see what's happening nowadays with a lot of the young people in some of the churches where they've really gotten into this whole thing about demonic possession and exorcising, and they're having exorcism meetings and they're shaking the demons out of people, and you see all this stuff on the internet and you're like, what is happening? Are we really beset by so many demons that we have all this exorcism that's needed right now? Because some of these people talk about like everything that happens in the church is a demon and you need to fix it, and there are deliverance ministries and everything. And then you have the other side of the church that doesn't recognize spirits at all. And I've got Paul here so I can ask him, how does this all shake out in reality?
I feel like John Vervaeke at MidWestuary. Let me make an observation about the demonic. One of the easiest things that Jesus did was cast out demons. You see him again and again and again. Cast out that demon, cast out that demon, cast out that demon. Was he hung on the cross because he cast out demons? No. What was far harder for him to deal with? All of the people without the demons. So, what is the demonic? Because you see him all the time talking to people. And if you imagine that Jesus is the Son of God, if you take Tom Holland's word for the fact that it's the greatest short story teller ever told, and he had tens of thousands of people hanging from his every word, well, if you had that kind of power, how on earth would you wind up in Jerusalem with your own chosen few maybe trying a misshapen attempt at violence to save you, but everybody hating you enough to put you on a cross? If you had that kind of power, if you could drive the demons out with a word. So, where's the problem? It's us. And you look at the fact that 50, 60, 100 years after Jesus was crucified, died, raised, and ascended, way more people in Jerusalem spoke well of him. So that says something about, that word, throwing out that word demonic, it's pretty cheap. And if you think that just flicking out demons is going to fix everything, I think you should read the gospel a little more closely.
Which brings us back to easy. It's way easier to put your mind on, oh my gosh, we have to cast out the demons. Oh my gosh, I have to learn everything I can about this conspiracy theory so that I'm the one that's in the know. Oh my gosh, I'm the one that's going to fix the world by going out and doing marches and stuff. Those are the easy things. Confronting your own problems in your own heart and in your own relationships, that's the other kind of thing that's the real easy, because if you can learn to do that, then life becomes beautiful every minute of every day.
And if I could just get rid of a demon, then all that great stuff about me would be true. Boy, I'd love that. I'd love to blame it on a demon. But here's the crazy thing. Again, you have these children that you love, and if you're a good parent, what wouldn't you do for your children? And the funny thing about growing up and having your children grow up is you learn, well, first of all, was I really a great parent? I was pretty young to know. I sure didn't know much when I was young, but that's when I was a parent. Seems kind of a funny design choice, but there it is. And at least in some level, you've had more influence and control over these little people's lives than you've had over anyone else. And yet any good parent will confess that they don't have a lot of control over their children. And they might even confess that we don't have a lot of control over ourselves. So for me, I'm comfortable with putting you randos in little circles. There's some people that when I started talking about this, they were all worried. Well, what's going to happen in those groups? I don't know. Could I stop it if I thought it was bad? No. So at some point, you just sort of have to live by faith and just believe and trust that the maker of this world, through all of this muck and pain and difficulty, and back to that pain thing, I'm getting to I'm over 60 now, and I've been in churches all my life, and I will tell you, all of the saints that I have recognized in my life, I have never seen a single one of them who does not have a story of real pain. Every single one of them has a crushing story. And I say, there's probably a correlation there. And so, yeah, we can argue with God about the design of the world. That's been done. But we got to deal with the world we have.
Well, so part of the design is death. And I told you I wanted to ask you about mercy, too. So maybe there's a way in which mercy and death. So there's one side of death that death has such a deep purpose in the world. I mean, for a lot of reasons. Overpopulation would be pretty bad if we didn't have death. But on a more serious level, the old philosophers used to say memento mori, and the reason you remember your death is because that's your creative spot. That means you have limitations, and therefore you're going to be more creative when you recognize your limitations. And death also acts as a kind of opponent processor to drive you to higher excellence. But death is also part of the fellowship of his sufferings, that I might know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. So I'm 77, and my father died when he was 72, and my mother when she was 74, and that was about 4 weeks apart. She was a little bit older than him. I was 40 years old at the time, so I had a lot of years of thinking, am I going to make it past 74, So I feel great. I could live another 40 years the way I feel. And thanks to Jordan Peterson, I rebuilt my brain, so I'm hopeful not to get Alzheimer's. But the end is coming somewhere for all of us. We don't know when it's going to be. And what does mercy really mean? And here I'm going to ask a question that's probably going to rattle some cages. Is it okay? One of the things that the Orthodox have been teaching for a long time is the importance of is it called the hesychasm?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Which I believe must be taken from the tax collector that went up to the temple to pray and who left saying he couldn't even look up at the temple, but he bowed his head and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Which I've always felt was the entire gospel in one verse, because there is a God. He is capable of mercy. He is a merciful God. And he might even have mercy on me, and I am a sinner, and I can cast myself on his mercy. On the other hand, if I spend my whole day praying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, which I have done sometimes. I've tried to weave that into my day. Over time, I've come to feel a little bit like it's diminishing my joy, and it's diminishing my hope, and it's making me fearful of death, and making me feel a little bit like a child with an abusive father sitting in the corner going, please have mercy, don't hit me. Because I've been that child, and I don't know how to understand it. So
I'm not Orthodox. So
I'm not asking you to be a cheerleader or
Nope,
denigrate
nope.
the Orthodox Church. I'm asking you from a Calvinist perspective, I guess.
So when I grew up in a Christian home, I went to Calvin College. When I went to Calvin College, I decided, I'd basically been a good kid. I was following the script along, and I decided, well, I'm really gonna read the Bible for myself now. You go to college, you have these thoughts, and I really want to read the Gospels, and so I started reading the Bible for myself. And even though I had gone to church all my life and done all the Christian-y things growing up, I was quite surprised by what I found in the Bible. And I was quite surprised, especially by what I found in the Gospels, because growing up in sort of an evangelical space, you expect to find like the 4 spiritual laws, and Jesus just didn't really just lay them out that way. And I find that Jesus is always dealing with people who want to argue about what you can and can't do on the Sabbath, or eat and not eat, and divide my inheritance with my brother. And there's all these weird things he's talking about, and it didn't seem terribly relevant. And yet, Jesus also at the same time, as again Tom Holland noted, seemed to write in a way that seemingly every generation across the various cultures of the world could somehow find fascinating. Not everyone, of course, but find fascinating. And so, and then when it's my job to somehow do evangelism and bring people in the church and introduce them to Jesus and those things, I find that most of my formulas don't work. In fact, if you have any understanding from what you've seen of me on the internet dealing with other people, I mostly listen. Because I find that some people need to pray that prayer a lot. But some people need other kinds of prayers, and they're there too. And a lot of it has to do with when and where and how. And I don't think any two Christians in the history of the world have lived identical lives. And so I can't answer. It's a great prayer, and the story that it comes from is an amazing story, because so often I am naturally much more like the other guy who says, I was born to good parents, I don't cheat on my wife, I pastor a church, and I'm surrounded by people who make really bad choices. Thank you, Lord, I am not one of them. And that gets me like nowhere. And so it's okay to feel how you feel with that prayer. You've got other ones that God has given you to pray.
Well, when you think of mercy, what do you think it means exactly? I mean, I know the old standby is grace is God's riches at Christ's expense, and mercy is I don't get what I deserve. But I don't think that's the fullness, okay?
So Sheldon Van Auken, new C.S. Lewis. How many of you ever read A Severe Mercy? If you're having marriage problems, don't read that book.
Yeah.
But that is a powerful book. A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken. And I would have to say, even though in many, many respects I've lived a golden life. I had great parents. I grew up in a great church. There was always food on the table. I went to a great school. I've had wonderful people around me. I can honestly say that almost everything that I've learned, which is of any value, has been learned against my will. That if I could have gotten out of it, I sure wanted to. But I learned faithfulness by not getting out of it. And I learned mercy and grace by understanding that I can't blame a demon for the asshole that I can be. So for me, that's mercy. But it's so often revealed in such painful ways. Finish with.
Is it time?
It is.
Okay. Good enough for me.
Okay, so John Van Donk's going to come up. We have to be out of this room by 6 o'clock and out of the other room by 6 o'clock. But that gives us, so I recommended we just do the estuary after this. So John and I are going to have to be succinct. So
You have a half hour.
Oh, we have a half hour. Oh, we don't have to be that
So
succinct.
if you want to take 10-minute questions and 20 minutes for that, it's up to you.
I've got one very important question.
All right, go with your important question.
So to me, there was a little bit of a missed opportunity, because at one point in the conversation, love and the personal and the demonic all on the table at the same time, and you never asked the question, what is the connection between all of those things conceptually? How are those things related? So I now am asking you the question, so you can answer it, since you did not attempt to when you were
In the person.
Pardon?
John Van Donk said, in the person, done. I don't know.
Well,
Use your mic if you're going to talk.
I'm not sure I I don't remember having the personal in there. I mean, I know we talked about that in the last session, but I didn't think that was one of my questions. So could you just clarify where you heard it?
You said, I said you had love and demonic. At one, I don't know which is one. At one point, one of the two of you said something about the person in the context of talking about love. It was kind of inevitable, and you end up linking those things. So there definitely was some mention of the personal in the context of what we were talking about love. And then all we need to transition to the demonic. And the whole time that part of the conversation was happening, it's like, I want to see those things talk to each other. And I think, Paul, your answer is insufficient because we still hit doing the demonic as demonic and casting out demons is still important because the person cannot be the person that the person is truly capable of being as long as the demonic presence is there.
True.
So.
You just answered the question.
So the reason I brought up the demonic, Nate, wasn't to diminish what's happening in the world. It was, okay, my baseline thing is when we bring up the demonic all the time, we're generating so much fear in people, in the children, everybody else. Oh my gosh, demons, demons, demons. Like my older daughter just came back to the Lord after being away for 15 years. And she's just in love with Jesus in an amazing way, and it's so exciting to see. But she's also very conscious of all these churches that are having the deliverance ministries, and she's trying to figure things out, right? So I became conscious of what was going on in the culture. And I think in any of these things, rather than focusing on those things that generate fear, and this is true in the news, in the internet, everything else, we need to be providing a viable, living, breathing, beautiful alternative that draws people into the orbit of the transcendence of Christ. And yes, there may be demons in some of these situations, but well, I mean, the Catholic Church has a very organized exorcism kind of a program that does not approach it from a standpoint of always having to talk. Am I right, Diane? Because you do the catechism. And I've heard some of those exorcists talking, and they talk about it in such a sensible way, just like Jesus, just, you know, through the Word of God and through prayer and not through fear. I don't know if you've seen any of these videos, Nate, of these groups that are casting out demons. They're creating so much fear in the environment.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think we're starting to a point in the culture where we can start to talk about the demonic again in a way that we don't necessarily associate the same kinds of things that we have historically associated with demonic, because we're starting to realize that the language of the demonic is a traditional language or something that we are starting to now come in contact with through other means. For example, like some of the things that is happening in psychology. And essentially, the fragmentation of persons is properly named demonic. And it's properly named demonic in a traditional and a modern sense at the same time without contradiction.
Yes, but it's going to require a lot of education to help people understand what is meant by demonic. I mean, there's those of us who have watched all these videos, right? But you have the rest of the world that when they hear demonic, they're seeing people thrashing on the floor and lots of fear and lots of magic and all of these kinds of things.
Which I would say is a manifestation of the demonic.
All right, let's transition. Do you want to stay up here, or do you want me to help you now?
Hey, can I add one thing, just one real quick thing about the demonic? Okay, it's about agency. Is what it's really.
You have to talk loud.
Okay. The demonic is about agency.
Come on up, John. No, you stay there. John's coming up.
Personhood is the seat of agency. Okay, that's what it is, both legalistically and metaphysically. And so the demonic in relationship to personhood is the utter loss of agency to some other. And if you talk to someone who's possessed, who tells you that they're possessed or that they went through a possession, that's what they'll tell you. It's a felt sense of loss of agency. And when you try to talk to them from the outside, they're unresponsive. Nothing that you give them alters their course. You don't feel like you're interacting with an agent or a person. And that seems across the board. Wherever you go, that seems to be what it becomes. And that can be both good and bad, right, Nate? Which might be where you're...
Parasitic on personhood, specifically, that's the
Well, are you talking about more like the daemon?
Let's not have it possess the room at this moment. We have videos for continuing these rabbit trails, but we've got a real time crunch, and I do want to talk a little bit about the future of estuary. And one of the things